Our next session is kind of about one of the most difficult aspects, I think, of any organisation's life cycle, and that's change. And when the British Red Cross rolled out one of their most recent projects, they really wanted to ensure they took a proactive approach to change from the very beginning. In previous projects, they had come up against the digital knowledge gap. They found that people didn't want to engage with the technology, and this often hindered progress. As they sort of moved forward, they really wanted to bridge that gap between the leadership team and those executing the project on the ground. Ross Pitbladdo is the British Red Cross's technology business partner. He recently embarked on the Digital Champions project, and he joins us today to share the valuable lessons he picked up with all of you out there in the ether, currently working on or about to start change-based project. Hey Ross, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Nice to see you.
Likewise, like you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm quite jealous about all this chat about custard creams now. I really wish I'd used that as an opportunity to go and get something, but
I totally
agree, your apple doesn't quite sound as satisfying. So
I still feel empty inside, Ross, to be quite honest. I'm just not fulfilled. But I'll have another hunt in a minute and see if I can come up with the goods. I'll leave you to it anyways, Ross. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And lovely to see so many people on here today. So I do have a couple of slides I'll just sort of talk through, but really keen to understand, what people know about change management already. So keen to see in the chat, how, if anyone knows anything or what your experience has been, because I think we all see change in slightly different ways. Some feel it's more important than others, or some just don't have any experience of it. And so I just want to talk that through today. So it'd be great to see that happening in the chat if possible, and see where people are and things like that. So let me just share my screen just now. Give me a second to load it up. Super. So hopefully you should be able to see that okay. Like Chris said, I am one of the organisation's technology business partners. I work for the British Red Cross. Joined the organisation back when I was a young 16-year-old starting volunteering, and have sort of forged a career out of that. So been in the organisation for a little while. I have a natural sort of passion for change management. I'm very interested in workforce engagement, how we bring people with us on journeys, because change is absolutely inevitable. The world moves at a pace, and organisations need to keep up with that in order to remain relevant, keep workforces engaged, and that sort of thing. And so what I want to talk through today is our experience of how we've applied that onto one of our projects. The project that I'll sort of reference quite often is a project we've called Smart Office, which is very simply just about empowering people in the front line to access some of their normal day-to-day applications. So, we're talking Microsoft Teams, we're talking your emails and things like that, and that's through tablet devices. Now, that's something like 600 tablets that we're putting out into one of our services, into frontline workers' hands. And what that means is that we're hoping that means that they can reduce their travel, that unnecessary travel to and from offices where they're having to scan in bits of paper, or in worst case actually having to travel just to be able to read emails. Over the last year, we've really seen how important it is that we have that agility as an organisation to be able to send communications out, really important communications about coronavirus updates, for example, and for people to get that as quickly as possible. So that was a really core part of why we wanted to do this. I've got some colleagues who have kindly joined the event today, which is wonderful, and this is absolutely no one-man band whatsoever, but I am delighted to be able to talk you through how we've approached some of our change. So at its core, why do I believe in change so passionately? It's fundamentally because organizations don't change, it's the people who change. Now, you probably heard that before, and that probably sort of resonates in some way, but I just want to talk you through this. So this, I've taken this from a blog written by Sophia. There's links down there, you can give that a Google search. And she fantastically puts this graphic in and references a book called Switch. Again, another book I would recommend reading. And it sort of talks about this is like your brain. So your brain is built up of lots of different components, and you've got the rider and the elephant. Now, obviously, ethics aside of putting riders on top of elephants, I think that this really helps in terms of an analogy to understand why sometimes change doesn't work. If that elephant has trodden the same path for many years and it knows that the way it's going, just like in the way that our workers may have known how to use their paper forms and they know how to do it, they can almost, muscle memory really kicks in and they can get going. They know exactly what to do, they're comfortable with doing it. If the logical part of your brain, which is represented by the rider in the analogy, says, but this way is easier, you could go this path and it would be easier for you, unless the emotional part, which is represented by the elephant, unless that fundamentally believes in it, you're winning not only your mind, but the heart. So we often refer to winning round hearts and minds, and that's really what this is about. How do you win round the logical part of your brain and the emotional part? Because if your gut says, yeah, I actually want to do this in a better way, you will change the path that you're on. And that's where change management comes in. How do we bring you on that journey to change your ways of working, even though it might be a little bit disruptive? Technology can be disruptive. Working in new ways is disruptive. Just this morning, my phone decided it didn't want to work anymore. And I've spent the morning on the phone to Apple support trying to get them to help me get my phone back because I feel totally lost without it. Change feels uncomfortable. So how did we approach it? Well, if you do a Google search, there are lots of different models. There's lots of different ways to approach change. And the thing is, there's no one answer to it. There's no magic sauce. There's no single bullet that's going to say, this is how you solve it. It's a combination of things. And that's what I want to talk through. We used a model of change by a company called ProSci. There's lots of different change models out there, whether it's Kotter's 8-step model of change or Bridges' transition model. There's so much content out there. I felt that this one resonated most because I really do think that it's very applicable to technology projects. The ADKAR model simply is an acronym that divides down it into awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. Now, if you walk through those stages, theoretically, you then increase the chances that whatever new technology you're bringing in, whatever change you're making, is going to be more successful than had you not bothered doing anything. We've all seen projects that have happened. We see this great technology. In fact, I was hearing stories that just, last year, the year before, a service had bought in a whole load of tablets in the hope that they were going to do exactly what we were trying to do, but they've ended up in cupboards because people didn't believe in them. They didn't see the value of them. And that's why we needed to approach it differently. That was our challenge. So how did we build the awareness? Now, awareness really taps into that rational part. So it's saying, on a rational basis, I understand why that way of working could be better. Desire really taps into that emotive part. How do you win round your hearts so that they go, actually, do you know what? I firmly believe that this is better for me. How do we answer the what's in it for me question? Now, people could have that absolute desire to change, but if we don't help them get there, they're never going to do it. You need the knowledge. You can't drive a car if you've not learned how to drive a car. So we needed to work out, how do we equip people? But equally, they have to have the ability to then put those skills and behaviors into practice. Again, back to the sort of driving a car. You can learn to drive and you can pass your test, but if you then don't have a car, well, what was it for? What was you now have the knowledge to do something, but if you don't have the ability to drive physically, you don't have the car, or in our case, you don't have a tablet in your hand, then that was a bit of a waste of time. And reinforcement. How do we continue to sustain the change? And we are coming to the latter part of our project. We're in the final few areas that we're sort of rolling out to. And that's the real key bit that we're sort of grappling with now, is how do we constantly embed it? So I'm going to talk through just a couple of the things that we've done. I won't sort of go through it in a huge amount of detail because there's obviously more for us to talk about. But I just want to put that into context, because actually sometimes models, they feel quite academic, and what does that really look like? So how did we then build that into what we did? So we built awareness through our effective communications. We've made videos, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. We had our digital change champion network. We engaged with managers. We also looked at, well, how do we tackle the desire bit? So we needed to make sure that on top of the awareness, and so in our emails, we made sure not only we tackled awareness, but we started our messaging with the desire. Wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to travel for half an hour to read your emails? Wouldn't it be good if you could reduce that 2 hour travel time to go to training? What could you do with that 2 hours? You could speak to more service users. You could support people in a more humane way, because that is what our power is as an organization. We're a humanitarian organization. That's what we want to do, is help people. So we needed to make sure that not only our communications, but also our line managers, our digital change champions, that they knew how to answer what's in it for me from the user's point of view. To build up the knowledge, we had to think about, well, what e-learning do we need to put in place? How do we work with our training team to do that? What about those people who are struggling with e-learning? What paper guides do they need in terms of getting set up to get into the tablet in the first place? How do we make sure our digital change champions and line managers are supportive and coaching? So we actually had to do some training for them to get there. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later, and I'll go into more detail on the Change Champion Network. We also had to make sure that our IT service desk were absolutely available and ready to answer questions about tablets. We had a small number of tablets in the organization. We had a lot of phones around already, so that was fine. That was nice and easy. How do we make sure that they were supportive and they've been engaged with us the whole way, which was super, super important. And then we needed to constantly reinforce it. So how do we make sure that we were always learning? And I'll talk through a feedback loop that we developed, which really thinks, how do we bring in that feedback, bring it into the team, and then create action from it, so that we can understand areas of resistance or obstacles. You can be different with this, okay? You don't have to follow the same mistakes we've made before. Be bold, be brave with change. One of the things that often sort of gets mentioned to me is, but surely, Ross, change is just about a good communication plan. Surely if we just put a communications manager in, they would be able to craft some beautiful comms, really great wordsmithing, and that would engage people. I don't agree. It is more than communications. It's your developing skills. It's how do you going to manage resistance proactively? How do you celebrate successes so that people can see that it's working? In addition to that, so on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see these are the different elements that made up our change management plan. That's a living, breathing document. I'm actually quite reluctant to share it around because it's never really, it's only a snapshot in time. It's a document that we always refer back to and we make changes. Our communication plan, I'm sure our program lead gets demented with me because I'm constantly changing it, because we have to. We have to make it appropriate. We have to learn the lessons from what we've done before and make it better each time for every phase of our project. And also on the right-hand side, this is just a snapshot of our change impact assessment. So for all the different audiences, what's their current state? What's the future state? What's the gap? And what are we going to do about the gap? Because that's really important. An area, it would be very easy for us just to distribute tablets and hope for the best. But what about that process for joiners, movers, leavers? What do line managers need to know about the change in that process? What do they do when somebody moves on? We need to make sure we're tackling these gaps. So it's broader than the technology. Technology is a really core part of it, but it's all of the bits around it which actually means that it's going to be more successful. So digital change champions, this was something that we continue to experiment with. I'm not sure we've necessarily got it completely right yet, but we're definitely on the way there. At its core, it's just a group of respected peers that can give you that support that you need. We all know those key people. Most of us probably are those key people when we're in offices that people would turn to and ask for support and say, "Oh, I'm really struggling with this on my computer," or "I don't know how to do this," or those sorts of questions. And there's always that person that goes, "Oh, I don't mind helping." And that influential person on a more informal basis. That's going to be far more powerful than a central project team trying to give support to everybody, because we don't have the trust of everyone, whereas our champions are already embedded in teams. So that we have to leverage that. How do we help to give them the right communication messages, and how do we help them to coach people? So they're respected peers. They're close enough to the project team that gives us feedback. Their job is to challenge us. They need to say, "But Ross, why is it this way? Why can we not do it in this way? This is what will land better with our people." Cool, fair challenge. Let's take that on board. And that's a really critical element. We have to be challenged by our champions, but they also have to help us to communicate out those key messages and help promote the project. They also need to understand the need for change. They need to fundamentally buy into it. If they don't get it, then they're going to have a really hard time trying to sell that to others. They need to buy in and they need to understand it. And it's more than just superficially buying in. It's they have to get it. We have to win their hearts and minds too. So the work on digital change champions really has to start quite early on in the project before you even get to implementation, to build that network and to do all of that work. Like I said, they coach their peers, they help them into new ways of working, and they should be savvy enough to be able to troubleshoot issues where it's appropriate, or know where to signpost them to if they don't know how. So we've got a Teams chat for all of our change champions, and they can come in and they can ask us questions, and they can do whatever they need. And we give them help, or they know how to signpost on IT service desk where necessary. But for me, the most important thing is they're the local voice. So I want to test the comms with them. I want to check their thinking before we do something else, because they're going to give us that insight, and that's really critical. I have wrote a blog about digital change champions, which goes into a bit more detail. You can find that on Medium. The British Red Cross has a digital and innovation blog on there, and I'd really encourage you to go and check it out. So what else did we do? Well, we looked at how we built things into the learning platform, and how did we create a community there to build support. We developed animated videos to help communicate the message. We developed engaging emails, or at least I hope you think it's engaging, where we used videos to communicate the story in there. So one of the really key parts of this is that we wanted to tell the story through our people. We didn't want it to be just about the project team saying, "Hey, we think that this is a really good idea." It had to be our people sharing that story. One of the things I definitely learned in this was, it's maybe too small for you to see, but in that email to the side, in Wales, we actually, for one of the first time, normally our internal communications are always in English for our UK teams. We put in another line in there in Welsh that said, "If you want this communication in Welsh, then please do let us know." And we have had someone come up and say, "Well, actually, yeah, I would like that. I would feel more comfortable with that." And that's another way that we can access somebody who we might have disengaged before, because we're making ourselves more inclusive and taking a better approach to that. Again, storytelling through videos. On YouTube, there's a few videos there. You can maybe put some links in the chat later, where we use it to tell the story of tablets. So we have 3 different videos, 3 different teams, all sharing with us how tablets have made a difference. And we embed that into our communications. We share that with managers to share with their teams. We make sure that that's the story that they hear, rather than it's, "Ross thinks you should use tablets because that's a good idea," or "the IT team think that you should be using tablets." We're changing our narrative. We're empowering our people to tell that story instead. This is the feedback cycle that I mentioned. So we really analyzed all the different user touch points, as I sort of described them. So if you start at the top, you've got all of our users. What were all the different interactions that they may have, and how would we then capture that? So we have one big list of all the feedback points that we gather, and then on a weekly basis, we have a feedback loop session as a project team where we go through all the feedback and all the actions. But that's the important bit. We take action. We change how we do it. We say, okay, cool. So that's really interesting about how that communication landed. So a really great example, a digital change champion fed back to us that in his team, the message had been perceived in a way, it had landed in a way that said that, oh, the project team just want us out doing more. They don't think that we were doing enough. That is absolutely not the case. We want to empower people to be able to be remote enough. And so although our communications, I mean, they certainly don't say that outright, but that was the way that it had been interpreted. So we had to then review our communications and go, okay, how are we going to change our language to mean that it doesn't land in that way, even if it was not intended to be. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that you're going to be able to do that on all occasions. You know, everyone will always have different views on how you approach things. But it's really important to listen to what people are saying and take action from that. And if that means you have to change your messaging, if that means that you have to share that with your digital change champion so that they can keep that message going, all of these things help. So some of my key takeaways, and I think after this we'll be doing a Q&A, so please do put any questions you have in because it'd be I'm really keen to chat that through. Consider the impact of the users. How will it really impact on them? Not just how you think it's going to impact them. Ask them. Say, if I was to give you a tablet, how would that change what you did? If I was to introduce new technology, why would that feel uncomfortable? A really great question you can ask the project team is, if this didn't go well, why would it have not gone well? Ask the managers. They will know. They tell us because they know their people really well. Build that group of supporters who are going to help advocate for you. Build that digital change champion network because it is tiring to try and do this yourself. Change is a big job. It takes a lot of time and thought, and it can be exhausting. So build a network of people who are going to support you with that, and be those early adopters who are going to encourage others to come in the direction. But don't be disappointed that not everybody's going to want to immediately leap up and they've read your communications and suddenly they want a tablet. It takes time. People will go through that journey at their own pace, and it's about how do we help people get there through a sort of path of least resistance rather than dragging them through it, but ultimately they will go at their own pace and we have to be cognizant of that. I think my final point really is invest in some change resource, and this isn't a sales plug for the change management profession, but it is really hard to try and, you can't just be a project manager and a change manager because you almost have competing sort of priorities. One has some milestones they want to achieve and one wants to help the people get there at a pace which is appropriate and is going to be more successful. Change managers will help. They can be a fantastic resource to tap into. They can create wonderful communications. And it is really important to consider, actually, is my project impactful enough that means I probably should think about investing in a resource instead of trying to do it myself, because that's going to be a really key part. So open up to any questions. You can find me on Twitter if you want to ask anything after today's session. More than happy to chat. It's a bit of a passion topic, so I sort of talk about it quite a lot. So yeah, if there is anything that you want to ask, by all means ask today or follow up with me separately. But that is the end of the presentation. So I'm going to head back to, there we go.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey Ross, thanks very much for that. That was really, really insightful, actually. Incredible knowledge sharing there. So thank you very much. I think there was a lot for the audience to take away. We do have a few questions coming in. And if you have more, please do submit them. Just hit the Q&A tab and then you can pop your question in there at the bottom and we'll get round to it. I'll do our best to anyways. a nice easy one for you for us to start off with, Ross. How can you encourage a change attitude as a colleague rather than a manager in a flat organizational structure? Specifically, how can you be a champion without being seen as a threat to be quashed? I think it's a fantastic question.
That's a really good question. I think regardless of whether you have a formal management structure, which is quite hierarchical, or flatter, which is obviously, in my mind, quite a good place to be in, you will still find, in my view, influential people. So there will be people that naturally come out as those go-to people, those influential leaders. And how do you bring them on board to be advocates for you? That's not to say that they should go around and start delivering presentations. What is the way that they communicate? How do they influence? Is that just through casual conversations, or, hey, have you heard that we're bringing out tablets? Like, how are you feeling about that? And having these constructive conversations. They're not there to be salespeople. They're not there to advocate for your project in that sort of way, but they are there to help you. So really tap into that. Who, and if you're struggling to work out who they are, I read a great article not that long ago that was talking about, well, just ask people, who do you turn to when you need information? If you're not sure about something, where do you turn to? Oh, I always go to Stephen in the office. He always helps, or he always knows. Cool, let's get him on board and helping us. So yeah, I think it's finding that influential network, regardless of whether it's formal or not.
Very cool. Thank you for that. Next question from David Blackmore. How do you motivate other staff to engage in the desire stage to change?
So I think it's all, that question, what's in it for me? Regardless of whether they're getting the tablets, I always come back to that. So when we're talking to managers, or we're talking to a great example probably is our learning and development team. So they don't directly line manage any of the frontline teams, but they are a key stakeholder. So they had a real interest. So we're saying, well, how can you get the most out of these teams having tablets? Oh, well, maybe they could do their online training. Yeah. So like, what's in it for that team? How do we help them? And that really starts to win people round. So it doesn't matter whether it's the end user or if it's other stakeholders, what's in it for them? And how do you share that desire with them?
It's that made me think of a sort of tongue in cheek. It's a more modern day version of make them think it's their idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, in a lot nicer way than that.
Yeah, we're sort of going in being like, yeah, one of the benefits we've listed is that we can increase the engagement in the learning platform, and we could increase the engagement in the learning platform. Yeah, we could. Good idea. That's super helpful. Thanks.
Brilliant. No, I love that. So next question is, how do you best deal with those who resist change?
I suppose back to one of my first comments, there is no single secret to that. So it's really about understanding those individuals. Everyone will have different reasons why they're resisting. And so I think it's quite helpful, and we've done this as a project team, just to list out what are all the reasons why people might be concerned and really dig in deep. So classic example we have, just to help illustrate that, we use a sort of Citrix virtual desktop environment for a lot of our teams, and in there is our network drive, so limited to being on the network to access some of your files. And so people will say to us, oh, I'm so frustrated, I really wanted to access Citrix. Why did you want to access Citrix? You can get Outlook, you can get everything. Oh, but I really need Citrix. Dig in. Why do you need Citrix? Go beyond that, and then they go, oh, well, it's for the files. Well, file sharing. What about this way of doing it? And how do we help the team get that way? So everyone will have different reasons, and it's really about understanding what those reasons are. And in order, there's a really great principle of, understand before being understood. So really understand their point, make sure you deeply understand it. And if you need to investigate more, do that. And then work out, okay, well, how can I help you to move in this way? How do we link that in to what we're trying to achieve? File sharing being a good example of that.
I love that. Understand before being understood. I'll
Mm.
definitely be pinching that in the future.
You take no credit, I'm afraid.
I recommend others do that as well. No, that is brilliant. Brilliant way of putting it. Brilliant way of thinking it. Really interesting question from Holly next. I know you mentioned a few books. She's asking, what is your suggested reading list for those not naturally comfortable with change but wanting to be?
Good question. I think it's recognizing that not everyone will be comfortable with change. I have become, I think I've found that I've become more comfortable with change. Like I've developed an attitude of, we'll sort of go with it and we'll see, and it's actually quite exciting and changing the organization. But if that doesn't feel comfortable, being just quite aware of that, I think, is a good first step. But also understand, maybe do a little research into some change, because you can then understand things like Bridges' transition model really helps you understand, okay, so it's actually quite normal that after a certain point, I'm going to feel a bit of a dip, and that's okay. It's okay. If you're doing an org restructure, or I'm very nervous about a new technology, I'm going to have that dip, and everyone else will, and then we come out the other side. If you're leading the change, if you're bringing in that and you don't feel comfortable with the change, I would suggest do a little research for yourself, try to find some techniques that work for you. And if really that's not resonating, find somebody who that is a strength, because if you don't passionately believe in it, or you don't feel that you can convey it with the same, you know, power that somebody else could, where can you lean into? That's not a weakness. That's just about, using the right people to help you in the right way, I would say.
Great. Holly also asked, what you mentioned a few books, I think, in the beginning of your talk. What would you recommend people reading who are looking to become these change ambassadors for their organizations?
It really depends on what level you're sort of thinking. So last year, I certified as a change management practitioner, because I was like, I just really like this. And there's a huge sort of textbook. It's actually a really useful handbook, and I actually refer to it quite often, because you're never going to remember all of it. So that's the Change Manager's Handbook. Switch by Dan something, I can't remember his name. I can ping a link to it on the chat. But I would really recommend that, because I think that just helps you to understand, really at its core, what is change about. From a thinking about people and why it's important to think about it. That's a really good book, and I'll ping that into the chat as well.
Brilliant, thanks. And yeah, we'll share those afterwards, far and wide. Next question from Danae, and I hope I've said your name right there. Apologies if not. She asks, what do you mean by investigating in a change resource? What types of resource are you referring to?
So I suppose, what I refer to when I talk about that is, I think project managers have, it's become widely understood that that is a solid profession, and often when you embark on something, somebody often takes the lead on that. A change manager is a profession in itself, and it is a recognized profession. It's newer, though. It's not as well established, I don't think, as project managers yet, but they complement each other. So they, like I said earlier, they have competing sort of priorities, but they work in a harmonious way to deliver the same thing. They both want the same thing out of that, and they can work together to push that forward. So when I refer to change resource, it is a people resource. It's investing someone that can help to get you forward, be that a practitioner or a change manager or whatever. People have various different ways of titling the same person, really, but there is a profession there, and how do you tap into that? And if you can't tap into that, and I appreciate, in a charity sector, we all struggle with resources, and finances are obviously tight. How do you upskill people? Do you have a communications person that could be upskilled in change, and they can then lean into that? But I don't think that the project manager and the change manager are the same person, because they have two different interests.
Yeah, I think you've answered one of the next questions, actually, which was, what is your view on upskilling project managers with change management training?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that it depends on the impact. So if you have a project which is actually quite low user impacting, but would still be useful. I think there's absolutely a place, and I would encourage everybody really, because we all come across change in some way, to upskill themselves a little. Where it then becomes quite high user impacting, and where you actually, it's more transformational, you're going to have to really shift how people work fundamentally. Don't feel that you have to do it all. The project manager and change manager can't just always exist in one person, in my view. Split that out, give that to two different people to lead on, because that's going to help you to move forward. So there's absolutely a place for upskilling, but don't confuse that with they can just do the same thing, because it really is dependent on the project.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, last question we're on to. What are the challenges of creating a network of champions?
Good question. So we still have challenges, and we're still learning, and particularly now that we're in this sort of like virtual world still, a lot of our frontline teams have continued to deliver services, but for some of them it's taking notes and writing up their notes in the car outside a hospital that they've just dropped a service user off at. So the interaction with people is still limited, and that's a real challenge for us. I think we've felt as a team that it's been a challenge to really invigorate them and get them feeling excited, because how excited can somebody feel over a Teams chat or on a Zoom call? We try to convey energy, we try to help, but I think it would have been different had we been able to be in the room with some of our champions and bring them on the way. So how do we keep them engaged, I feel has been a real challenge for us. And keeping some momentum, because a lot of them have sort of drifted away because they've just lost interest a bit, and there's not been the same momentum for them, which is unfortunate.
No, I totally understand that. Well, that's it. We are out of questions, but thank you very much. I think that was an incredible session, especially so relevant, I think, to what a lot of organizations are going through at the minute, and different varied levels of change and having to deal with new things. So thank you very much for your time today.